Okay, since it's 1:10 already, let's get started with our session. I don't think we're waiting for
Rebecca,
Mhm.
can we check either everyone is here right now? And I
Yeah.
see Dr. Zimmerman, and can we check the other panels to make sure that, oh, okay. Dr. Lakhia here.
Okay, so if
And
you're a panelist, can you turn on your video? That should bring you to the top of the screen. Great.
yeah, okay, Hopp, where's
We got
Dr.
them all.
Hopp?
We got them all. Yeah.
Great.
All right, so if anybody else on here is not part of the trainee session, this is not where you're supposed to be. You should have a link to go to another session if you're not supposed to be here. But otherwise, welcome. Thank you very much for sticking around this afternoon, and this is our trainee session. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce what we're going to do today, and then I'm going to hand it over to our panelists so that they can talk about themselves for a little bit, introduce themselves. So today our session is going to be questions for a panel who are going to tell us a little bit about some advice that they have for us in how to be good researchers and how to advance our careers and stay healthy and mentally sound during that time. So let me introduce to you John and Jan, and my name is Becca, and we have been organizing this committee. And we have Dr. Zimmerman, Dr. Lakhia, Dr. Maric-Bilkan, and Dr. Hopp here today on our panel. And they're going to introduce themselves and talk, just to give a little bit of an idea of who they are. So they each have a small presentation. They're going to talk for 5 minutes or so. And let's start with Dr. Zimmerman, because you're first on my list. So if you can share your slides, that'd be great.
All right. Can you hear me and everything? Hopefully.
You are good.
Okay. Are you seeing the right one, I'm assuming? Okay. All right. So first of all, thank you to Yang, Rebecca, and John for inviting me to be on this panel. I feel kind of honored, maybe a little bit out of place, but thank you very much for the invitation. So just going to give you a little bit of background about myself, my life growing up, and how I got to where I'm at. Right now, I'm currently an assistant professor at the Department of Internal Medicine in the Division of Nephrology at the University of Oklahoma Health Science Center. So I was originally born and raised in Wisconsin. So for those of you who, can you see my pointer? Right, okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Wisconsin, I'm from this little small town right here called Westboro, Wisconsin, which has a population of about 100 people. So I'm from an extremely rural area. I graduated with 40 kids in my high school class. My nearest neighbor growing up was over a mile away. The nearest kid my age was like 3 to 4 miles away. So it was a very, very, very rural area of Wisconsin. As many kids in Wisconsin do growing up, especially up in our area, I grew up playing sports, doing hunting, fishing, pretty much anything outdoors or anything sports related, because quite honestly, there's not a whole lot else to do where I'm from. So we did a lot of that. My dad was a logger, so those of you guys might not know what that is. He basically goes out there and chops down trees, and then he hauls them off to the paper mill to make paper products and other things like that. So my mom was a teacher's aide at the local school, so she was able to be home with me during the summer to take care of me. Graduated high school in 2004. Just growing up, highlight big Badger fan, big Packer fan. So not only did I play sports, but I also really love to watch sports on TV. Big Atlanta Braves fan. Love spending time with friends, things such as that. So I graduated high school in 2004, and then I went from my little rural town here to a little bit bigger rural town in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. So you probably haven't heard of this either. It's about a population of about 85 to 90,000 people. So for Wisconsin, this is considered to be like a really big town. At Wisconsin Eau Claire, I was actually recruited there to play football. So I played football for a year in college there. From 2005 to 2006. And then I did a double major in biochemistry and molecular biology. So I really started to get into the sciences when I was an undergrad at Eau Claire. During my time at Eau Claire, I was lucky enough that even though we're a fairly small school, we had a lot of research. So I was able to do research with 3 different faculty members there, which resulted in 2 publications. And one of the faculty members that I worked with was actually pretty intensive into research, despite the fact that we're not a research intensive university. So she really encouraged me to go to grad school. And because of her, I applied to different graduate schools, graduated in 2009, and then I went on to do my PhD at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. So I entered their graduate biomedical science program in 2009, where I joined the lab of another person who is also from Wisconsin, kind of a rural area as well. So we had this immediate kind of Wisconsin love and bond that drew us to one another, I think. Her name was Dr. Joanne Murphy-Ulrich, and in her lab, I studied the involvement of ER stress in relation to fibrosis in her lab. During my time in her lab, published 4 papers. I was lucky enough to win the Outstanding Graduate Student Award at UAB. And most importantly, probably is I met my future wife while I was in graduate school at UAB. I finished my PhD in December of 2014, and then because my wife wasn't my wife at the time, I decided that I needed to stay. So as we've been dating for a few years, so I really wanted to see how this played out. So I stayed, did my postdoctoral fellowship with Brad Yoder, who everybody here is very familiar with at UAB as well, beginning in 2014. And I finished my postdoctoral fellowship in 2020. So while I was with Brad, we published 12 papers. I got a KO1 grant to help launch my lab. I was named the Outstanding Postdoctoral Fellow. Married my girlfriend that I said I mentioned met in graduate school in 2016 to become my wife. And we also had our first daughter during this time, Georgia May, which is shown here down on the bottom. After I completed my postdoc, I loved the postdoctoral fellowship. I loved the work. I loved the science. I loved kind of like the independence that you can have with your own lab. So that really drove me to want to have a career in academics. And because of that, I did a whole bunch of I applied for a whole bunch of different faculty positions across the country, did about 10 different faculty interviews at different institutes, and I eventually accepted a position here at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center in February or March of 2020, which that date is really important based on the COVID pandemic, which hit just a few months later. So I was actually super lucky that I got my position when I did, because if it had been about 3 months later, there's hiring freezes all over the country. So I was lucky that I just kind of like squeaked in there right before the COVID pandemic and the hiring freeze hit. So since my time as a faculty member here at OUHSC, published 3 papers. I've actually gotten 13 grants funded, so I've had quite a bit of luck with the grant funding, which has been very helpful for me. And most importantly, once again, we had our second daughter, Sutton June, which is shown here on the bottom. So that kind of brings me to present day, where I'm still assistant professor here, and I guess that's about all I've got to say. So.
Thank you very much. That's great. Okay, so let's hear from Dr. Hopp now. You're next on my list.
All right, I am trying this sharing thing. Let's see.
Yeah. It's coming.
You can see the presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect. But you see it in notes, right? Unfortunately, somehow. How do I get
your display settings right there in the middle? Click on that. Oh, sorry.
what happened?
You took it out of presentation mode. Yeah, up in the top middle, display settings. Next one.
So that is blocked by me by the Zoom bar, which is the problem. That Zoom bar doesn't go away. Hold on. Let's do this differently. I'm gonna stop sharing again. Display settings.
You can actually drag the Zoom bar wherever you want it.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, share screen. Let's do this again. Display setting and
Top one. Yep.
got it. Perfect. Now we're just in the wrong slide. So, anyhow, so I am currently an assistant professor at the Department of Medicine at the University of Colorado, Anschutz Medical Campus. I don't have as many fun slides about my life as Kurt, so apologies about that. But in terms of my career path, I got my bachelor in 2008 from Brescia University in Owensboro, Kentucky, which is located right here. But I originally come from Germany and was moved to Owensboro, Kentucky because I got a soccer scholarship, and my parents told me that something like that is a unique enough opportunity that I should just do it and move out of Germany to the US and see what happens. I don't think they ever anticipated for me to still be here. But so my whole family, parents, grandparents, everybody still lives in Germany, and I'm the only one here in the US. Being a German citizen is important to note for how my career path shaped out, because it meant that during my graduate and postgraduate career, I was not eligible for NIH funding. And so I had to find alternative approaches for that. But during my time at Brescia University, I had a very encouraging biochemistry professor who told me that I need to do a summer internship and that Mayo has a great program to do that. So I applied and visited Mayo Clinic in the lab of Peter Harris, who everybody of you knows, the summer of 2007, which was my junior year. And that then led for me to also apply to the Mayo Clinic PhD program, where I was from 2008 to 2012. While rotating through various labs there, I still in the end decided to go back to Peter and do my PhD there. My PhD was focused on the phenotype and genotype correlations in ADPKD. And as part of that, we mimicked a mutation found in patients and in a mouse model. And that model is now known as the PKD1-RC model throughout the community and has been used in various institutions by this point. My PhD, particularly making that model and characterizing it, was funded by an AHA pre-doctoral fellowship that I had the last 2 years of my PhD there. Then I did a postdoc also at Mayo. At that point, I didn't stay because of personal reason like Kurt, but I liked it there. The Mayo PKD Center was there, so I had no urgent need to move. So I started a postdoc there simply out of comfort at that point, and continued my studies on phenotype-genotype correlations in ADPKD, just taking a little bit different approach on looking at somatic mutations, which that project I got funded in through the ASN as a postdoctoral fellowship the last 2 years of my postdoc there. Of note as well, during that time as a postdoc, I tried to establish more side projects, trying to figure out where my career might take me. And so I ended up doing some genetic work in primary hyperoxaluria, and I became part of the U54 there that they had at the time. That allowed me to get additional experience as well as get exposed to another research science community beyond PKD. Also gave me a little bit more credibility on the genetic side of things with the different scientists and researchers. And on the model front, I also helped the Mayo PKD Center out in establishing and continuing their model systems core during that time. During my postdoctoral time, I met my now husband, and in 2015, he got an offer at the University of Colorado to move his PhD career, or at that point also postdoc career, to that campus. And I always knew that I needed to leave Mayo or the Mayo PKD umbrella to kind of achieve independence. So this move of him to Colorado was a good reason to leave Mayo. I didn't know whether in Colorado I would be able to continue PKD research, but luckily, I was able to find out that they were looking to expand their basic research program. So I got hired there as an instructor, which is a junior faculty position in the end of 2015. There's a couple mistakes that I made with that move to becoming a junior independent faculty, and I'm happy to talk about them later throughout the discussion, that are good advice and wouldn't do again. But as a junior faculty and trying to become independent, I truly moved completely research fields from the genetic side of things to now studying immunomodulation in PKD, and established that as a completely new field, which I got started with an internal grant there in Colorado, and then had a K award as well as PKD Foundation grants on it. While establishing that lab, I also developed 1 or 2 side projects that don't necessarily have to do with immune cell biology and PKD, just so that there is some backup ability in case projects fail. And that brings me pretty much to now. My lab has always been 1 technician and 1 postdoc, as well as myself. That was the same since I moved in 2015. There are different people now, but the number of people has always been there. I have 2 major projects going on and am doing as well some industry-based projects. In terms of personal life, I am loving to be outdoor. I love running, hiking, biking, and camping. I have 2 boys. They are depicted here, always in the mountains, always loving hiking and being silly. And the one thing that I can definitely say that my academic career with having kids has changed a lot. Neither good nor bad, it just simply has changed in terms of multiple aspects, and I'm happy to discuss that later as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, let's just quickly move on to Dr. Lakhia, if you could get your slides up. Perfect. Yeah, good, good, good.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you. I also do not have the beautiful pictures that Kurt was able to share, but my name is Ronak and I'm an assistant professor here at UT Southwestern Medical Center. And my route was a little bit, oh, I can't seem to advance my, see, there we go, different than Kurt and Kat. So I followed more of the physician scientist track. So, and I'm not sure exactly what this group is composed of, but to give you a little bit of background. So I grew up in high school knowing that I kind of wanted to go and become a physician, go to medical school. And so at the time, and they still exist right now, but not nearly as much, there were quite a few these programs where you could actually be accepted into medical school while you applied for college at the same time. And one of the combination schools that existed was in the city of Chicago. And so I was accepted into a program where I would do my undergraduate degree at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. And then I was already accepted to medical medical school at that point. So I knew going into my freshman year of undergrad that if I maintained my grades, I didn't have to take my MCAT if I didn't want to. And I was accepted to a medical school in Chicago, which is now called Rosalind Franklin Medical School. It had a different name at the time. However, we also had this option, which I will get to a little bit later on, where we could take the MCAT and choose to go to a different medical school. And that's kind of ultimately the path that I took. But so I did my initial training at IIT, and my major was in molecular biochemistry and biophysics. So basically, I was one course short of triple majoring in biology, chemistry, and physics at the same time. And through this program, we were able to apply for undergraduate research studies, and that was my first exposure to basic science or bench research. So I was accepted into a summer undergraduate research program at the Harvard School of Public Health, and I spent a summer in Boston studying drug resistance mechanisms in the Plasmodium falciparum parasite under Dr. Diane Worth. And at that point, little did I know that the work I did at that point 4 years later would turn out to be actually my first publication at the time. So during undergraduate, I did take the MCAT and decided that I wanted to come back because I'm originally from Dallas, Texas. And so I was accepted to UT Southwestern Medical School to complete my medical degree. And so I opted out of the program that I was already accepted into to come back down here to Dallas at the time. And during medical school, again, we were offered opportunities to do summer research internships, basically in almost any lab on campus. It's one of the beauties of our institution is that they almost never say no to having medical students or students coming and wanting to do research. And so I simply sent an email to the Nobel laureate Brown and Goldstein lab asking if I could come work in their lab for the summer and learn a few things. And so I was fortunate enough to work in their lab to study lipid metabolism at the time. And it's now come back into focus again for me as well. And I really enjoyed my time at that time doing this and learning how to think about projects and science and how to do rigorous research was probably one of the big things that I remember from that time period in that lab. So at that point, I actually got married and at the end of medical school. And so we did a couples match for residency. And so I was in Houston to do my internal medicine residency at the Baylor College of Medicine. And then again, I got a third opportunity to spend dedicated months in the research laboratory as part of my residency. So I worked with Dr. Mitch at that time. And that's when I decided I really, I love internal medicine, but I wanted to become a nephrologist. And I really wanted to have some dedicated time to do research, not just 3 months here, 3 months there. And so when I applied for my nephrology fellowship, I was looking for programs that would really foster that, to have that dedicated time to spend time in doing research. And so ultimately I chose to come back to UT Southwestern, where I did a 1 year of clinical nephrology fellowship. And then I was a T32 research fellow under the mentorship of Dr. Vishal Patel, which you heard speak earlier today. And then in 2016, I transitioned to a faculty as an instructor initially, and then now as an assistant professor. And I'm currently a awardee. And I've been fortunate enough to have some additional funding by the PKD Foundation, the ASN, and then pilot funding at our institution, and also through the O'Brien Institutes over the years. I have a research laboratory that focuses on 2 different things. So I study lipid metabolism, kind of drawing back to the work that I had learned, the pathways I learned back in medical school, and then also focusing on transcriptional and epigenetic dysregulation, both in the context of polycystic kidney disease. In addition to the research laboratory focus, as part of my faculty appointment, I established the PKD clinic here at UT Southwestern. At the time, we were the only PKD clinic in the state of Texas, and I currently lead that clinic as well. So that's all I have.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, and our last speaker is Dr. Maric-Bilkan. If you could share. Oh, perfect, she's on it.
Okay, slideshow, is that projecting? Yep. Well?
Yeah.
Hey, hi, everybody. Again, thank you to the organizing group for inviting me to be part of this session. I'm delighted to be so, even though I'm an outsider, it seems. First of all, it looks like I'm a generation or 2 older than most of you. But I'm not a researcher, or at least not anymore. I'm a program officer at NIDDK, and some of you may have had some interaction with me in that capacity. So I'm glad to be here in that sense, that I can offer maybe some thoughts about how to get grant funding, what not to do and what to do. But also, since I have been a researcher and similar to Katharina, I am not, if you can probably see by my accent, I'm not from around these neck of the woods. So I'm going to give you some examples of what to do as a foreigner and how to achieve success in this country as well. As I said, I'm currently a program officer that oversees basic research on PKD and diabetic and kidney disease, as well as sex differences in kidney diseases. But prior to getting to where I am today, I actually have a background in engineering, and I got that degree in a country that doesn't exist anymore. It is Serbia now, but it used to be called Yugoslavia back in 1990. But once the civil war started over there, my parents felt that it was much safer for us to move to Australia. And I should say back to Australia, because I was born in Australia. But as a little baby, my parents decided, against all the odds, most immigrants go from Yugoslavia to Australia. My parents decided the other way around. Let's go back to Yugoslavia. But once they were there, 2 years later, they couldn't make up their mind where they wanted to be. So we moved between Yugoslavia and Australia 4 times in the period of 8 years. So, and no, my parents were not diplomats, were not in the military. They just couldn't decide where they wanted to be. Anyway, so I had a really exciting experience up until the age I was 8, moving from continent to continent. But once we moved back to Australia in 1990, as I said, once the Civil War started, I got my Bachelor's of Science degree, as well as my PhD at the University of Melbourne. And then I went on to do my postdoc at the University College in London, the UK. And it was such a terrible experience for me that I went back to Australia thinking I was going to get out of science. And I had lunch with my back then my PhD mentor, and I told her that, and she said, no, you can't do that. Just because you had a disappointing experience, that's not the reason to leave science. And I made a deal with her that I would spend a year in her lab. And if I still, after that 1 year, was not happy doing research, that I was allowed to leave it. But in that 1 year time, I was invited to, actually my mentor was invited to give a talk at Georgetown here in Washington, DC. But she didn't like traveling. My mentor didn't like traveling, so she sent me instead. I gave a talk. Several months later, they offered me a faculty position. So I moved from Australia to the United States in 2001. In fact, it was September 15th of 2001, just 4 days after September 11th event. My parents thought I was crazy, especially that I had rented an apartment across the Pentagon in Pentagon City. And they said, you're not going to go there and move there right now. It's like, yeah, that's the safest place to be right now, unfortunately. So I did move at a very critical time in history of this country. And I spent the following 7 years as an assistant professor at Georgetown University. Then I studied sex differences in diabetic kidney disease at a time when studying sex differences was almost unheard of, and getting a grant was extremely difficult, especially for somebody who did not have a green card. I came on H-1B visa, and I was only eligible for foundation grants such as the American Diabetes Association, American Heart Association, but I managed somehow. But I also managed to get an R01 straight after that. Then I moved down to the University of Mississippi Medical Center. To many of my colleagues, it was a surprising move, given that they knew my personality, and they knew for a fact that I would not fit in that environment. Even though I learned a lot in that department of physiology and biophysics. Arthur Guyton, who wrote the textbook of medical physiology, was the chairman, not at the time, but his legacy was felt all around all the time. So I did learn a lot about renal physiology, but on a personal level, it definitely was not an environment that I could fit in. So then several years later, at a meeting unrelated to anything that I do currently, it was mentioned that somebody at the National Heart, Lung and Blood Institute, a program officer, was retiring, and that there was going to be a position open. And I got married at that time, and my husband was also from Serbia. did not speak a word of English when he came to this country, and did not fit in Mississippi either. We didn't have anybody to associate with, nobody who spoke his language that could, help him assimilate and things like that. So I made a decision to quit my academic research career, and joined the NHLBI as a program officer. And I was overseeing grants related to central regulation of blood pressure, urogenic hypertension, pregnancy-related hypertension. And so it was a completely different career path for me. There was no research. I was overseeing people's research. I was involved in maybe coordinating some of that research, but definitely not at the bench, not applying for grants. And I can tell you the move at the time was very difficult, but as time moved on, I thought that was the best thing I ever did in my life. It was a whole lot less pressure for me to get grants, not just to do research, but also feed my family, because most of us have had positions that required us to get grants in order to fund our salaries, not just our research. And after several years of NHLBI, I moved across to NIDDK, which is more of a home to me in a lot of ways. Even though NHLBI is just another institute at the NIH, it's like a different country. They have a different culture, different hierarchical system. They operate completely different. I'm a lot happy at NIDDK that I still feel as a scientist, even though, as I said, I'm not in the lab. But I take great pleasure in trying to help you guys who are still trying to pursue your academic research careers. And I'm very happy to be here. If I can be of any assistance to you, please just let me know. On a personal level, I just told you I travel all around the world, living in all sorts of parts of the world, but traveling as well. And now I've gotten my 8-year-old son also hooked on traveling. So we now travel together. I'm also a tennis fanatic. A very good friend of mine, some of you probably don't know who this person is, but she used to be the #1 tennis player in the world, Monica Seles. Her grandmother and my grandmother were very good friends, and we grew up as kids. She was 4 years older than me, but we were born on the same day, 4 years apart. So we spent some time in our childhood, and I used to follow her around the Grand Slams. So you've seen her playing all of these Grand Slams in the day, right? She's retired. She's 48 years old now, and some of you may know, she had an unfortunate event that she got stabbed on the tennis court, and that ended her tennis career, unfortunately. But she's still a great friend, great person to be around. I also love food and wine, both to eat and drink as well as prepare it. So that's big part of my life, and also traveling and spending time with my family and friends and my dog. So see, these are some of the pictures of my family, my parents in Australia when they came to visit here, and my very best friend in Yugoslavia. Even though we haven't seen each other, we don't see each other physically often. We were friends since we were 5 years old, and we still keep in touch. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so that is our introduction done. And now we're going to get on to talking about some of the topics and asking for some advice and some help. So you won't be able to unmute, I don't think, but if you could put your questions into the chat, then we'll be asking Jan and John to watch that and ask those questions. So our first session is we're just going to have 10 minutes talking about grant application tips. So to the panel, what are your tips for grant applications, for writing good grants? And let's see if we get any questions.
Okay, since I'm unmuted, I guess I'll start. I think for me, the things that I've learned over the years is, one, that the more you write, the better you are. So kind of practice makes perfect sort of idea. I find that the more, like I said, the more I write, the more grant applications I read, it all kind of helps me with like formulating my own grants. And the other thing that I've really found that's helped me, especially with in terms of stress and grant writing, is that getting grants done early, I find or getting drafts of grants done early really helps reduce the stress that I have when it comes to submitting them. So I always try to get a draft done about 3 weeks before the grant deadline, just so that I have time to kind of let it sit for a while, and then I'll come back and look at it a few days or weeks later. So I found those things kind of really helped me in my grant writing.
I'm kind of the opposite to Kurt in terms of how to prepare grants, that I don't think necessarily is any worse than such. I tend to procrastinate to the last minute, which increases my stress beforehand, but I somehow manage to be still at ease the weeks prior. So I guess the average stress across time is about the same, I would think. But what I have found is in terms of preparing the grant, it really helps me to have a document, just a simple Word document of bullet points of really what is the main question of each specific aim that you're asking to answer, and what are 3 experiments that are key to answer that question. And then looking back at that, once you have it all written out, whether it's a 2-year grant that typically has 2 aims, or a 5-year grant or larger grant that typically has 3-ish aims, to then look back and say, okay, are these experiments and everything that it entails feasible to do in a time frame with the resources that you have on hand and that you're planning to use within that grant. The other thing that I can advise from a reviewer standpoint for applicants that write grant is to proofread your grants, because I mean, I'm a little obsessive compulsive, and it's the German nature in me, I have to admit to that, but it is nothing more annoying than trying to be flustered as a reviewer by the grant in terms of like, what is exactly the experiment he or she is doing based on how it is written. You're really wanting to be sure that everything you're writing in your experiments is clear, that the figures that you're referring to are actually there and showing what you're planning to show. Because it's surprising how often that doesn't happen, because people do write grants last minute, kind of like I do. And as a reviewer, you get annoyed. So you don't want to get your reviewer ever annoyed in terms of that.
Yeah, I would sort of piggyback a little bit on that, but I think I'm assuming a lot of this audience is, undergraduates, postdocs, really early career faculty. So, my advice would really be to start early and to have your mentors look at what you're proposing and writing, because that draft will get rewritten multiple times until you've kind of been able to form those questions. And so don't be shy about, thinking about it ahead of time, writing it down, and then showing it to your mentor, because a lot of these are probably career development grants and that will require your mentor's support. And don't be scared of that feedback that, perhaps your question is not wrong, it's just not framed properly, and that's kind of the process that you need to go to. So take that time to write and to give other people that will, give you advice time to be able to give you advice back. And then to remember that a lot of these initial grants require a lot of documentation, showing institutional support, mentorship committees, things like that, and even mentor support. So there are a lot of pieces that you yourself are not necessarily completely responsible for. And so you want to be able to plan it so that way everyone can give you their pieces to make sure that you have the strongest package when you apply.
And I want to comment from a dual perspective now, as well as the person who used to write grants. I completely agree with whoever said, I think Kurt initially said it, do it early enough so you can share it with not just your mentor, like you said, Ronak said, if this is a training grant, you need your support of your mentor and input from that point, but also from your peers. You'll be surprised how much you can hear from people who are not intimately connected to your project. Their perspective is valuable because you're going to have reviewers who are not intimately, involved in the project either. So if you can convince somebody from the onset that this is a good idea, it's likely the reviewers will have the same kind of reception to it. From the standpoint of a program officer, I will encourage you strongly to reach out to your program officer also very early in the process. We are able to offer a perspective from, again, we're not going to review the grant, but we know what the review process is like. We know what the reviewers are thinking, what they expect. So we can often give you valuable advice before you even start writing it, let alone writing it. I always offer, I would say, a review service. You share with me your specific aims, I will give you feedback on it. So I think that that's also helpful. I think there's a comment in the chat, if I can comment on the process of grant reviewing. So it depends on what the kind of grant that you're writing, what the reviewers are asking for. So from perspective of a training award, I will tell you that while science is important, it's not the most important aspect of your proposal. Your career development, your interaction with your mentor, and how the research that you're proposing is going to actually accelerate or propel your career is more important than the science itself. But these are conversations you should have with your program officer. And if you're applying for PhD research, it's most likely that I will be that person. Please reach out to me. We can set up a one-on-one conversation. We go into detail of what you really need to tackle. But it's a career development program. It's not a research program. So the balance and the focus is different.
Yeah, one other thing I'd like to add is along the lines of what Christine said is those career development parts are really important, and they take a lot of time and effort to write. So I think for me personally, when I was writing mine, it took me probably longer to do those sections than it did the actual grant itself, because it takes a huge time investment. So make sure you don't just focus on writing the grant itself, and you spend a lot of effort and time in that, because it's definitely important.
Yeah, I would definitely second that as well. I think when I submitted the first K award, they had probably as much comments towards the career plan as they did to the actual research plan. It was really that they are taking it apart in terms of how will the plan that they outline truly help you become an expert in the field that you're trying to become independent on. Do you have the right support system laid out to help you do that in terms of mentor program or courses you plan on taking? And whether this research that you are proposing is independent enough from the PI where you just are in the lab or going to leave the lab, depending on the situation you're in, to truly give you the chance that at the end of that 5 years for a K, for example, you can become or be an independent BI and be seen as such.
Yeah, there is a question from Victoria. You asked about the related question. Her question is the career development focus as important for K grant as it is for the F grant? I think Christine is going to answer this question.
Yeah, even more so for K awards. The F grant is for earlier stages of your career, where you definitely need input from your mentor, and that relationship with your mentor is extremely important. As you move on into your career, you apply for the K award. That is a stage where you're actually showing your independence, and how you're going to achieve the independence if you have not yet is very critical, and how you're going to develop your independent program is, again, it's a different ball game to the F. The focus is a little bit different, but that aspect of your grant is just as important as it is for your fellowship. Absolutely.
Can I ask a question? Take advantage of my, So for Christine, how should we deal with the comments from the reviewer? Sometimes the reviewer, some of the comments is not, so make sense. I mean, some of them, how should we deal with them, or how should we deal with the rejection of our grant application? Yeah, the other panel can comment on this. as well.
Start with a bottle of wine. That was my seriously. Everybody's going to tell you this. Don't take it personally. But honestly, it's so hard not to, because you're reading it as a person. You kind of, that's a natural human instinct, you know, to take it. It's not meant to be a personal attack by no means, but it affects you on a personal level. So read it and then set it aside for a few days. Don't try and not to think about it. Then read it again and again and several times after that. Then talk to your mentor or whatever colleague or collaborator you have. Reach out to your program officer. We often have comments that are beyond, that are just, you know, in the summary statement. The summary statement is a verbatim of what the reviewer said in the review meeting. But sometimes, you know, how long did they spend on this particular point? What was the general enthusiasm? In between the lines is something you're going to hear only from the program officer. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. Now, you're absolutely right. And that's a similar response to when you write a rebuttal to the reviewer's comment for a paper, right? Do you address absolutely every comment? Probably, yes, you have to acknowledge every single comment, but is every single comment valuable? Probably not. So it's up to you to gauge, and with your, you know, in collaboration with your mentor, what comments you take action on. And again, what are those critical ones is something that you're going to hear from the program officer. They will tell you exactly what the comments you need to focus on mostly. But you need to at least acknowledge them, because otherwise the reviewers are going to say back, well, this person didn't read my comments, and they will take the comment personally. And that's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think rejection kind of happens with these sort of grants. So just because you get rejected, I know I took it personally. I was hurt. I was mad. And it lasted a few days. And then the more you submit, the more you kind of learn to like let go of it quicker. But I think just try not to give up, because like, for example, my first case submission got triaged. It didn't even get discussed. So I went from not discussed to resubmitting the same application to getting it funded on resubmission. So even if you're in that pile of grants that got triaged on the initial submission, don't give up. Like Christine said, I'd say what I did when I got my comments back from the initial submission is I took every single one, put it into Word, and then put a response with how I was going to address it, with like not only with excruciating detail of like how I was going to go above and beyond the comment that they had, and how I could go above and beyond to address and rebut whatever they said. And that's sometimes it's like, I feel like most times on those grants, the criticisms they have are pretty valid, and they're pretty helpful in shaping your research and your career development. Sometimes they're maybe a little bit excessive, but for the most part, I think they're pretty constructive and they're pretty helpful. So I just took every single comment they had and made a detailed response to it and how I was going to address that. And then I used that and guided my resubmission, and it seemed to pay off. So it definitely is something that you can be, it definitely hurts when you get, especially a not discussed, for me, especially, but I think you just use it as motivation to come back.
I really just want to also quickly emphasize what Christina already said. Once you get your comments back and you overcame the initial shock that it wasn't funded, if that is the case, truly reach out to your program officer and have that talk. It made the world of a difference to my KO1 resubmission to have done that. I had one reviewer who clearly had many issues with the grant, some more justified than others. It was over 1.5 pages of comments back for the research application only, not even to think about the career development grant. And my program officer is Tracy Rankin. I had a meeting with her, we chatted about it, and she precisely told me where the panel got most hung up from among the 1.5 pages of comments. Like, this is what was the longest discussed. This seemed to be the most relevant, that this person, even so there were 1.5 pages of comments, this person seemingly was most concerned about that particular aspect of everything. And so I could focus my resubmission much better, because I knew for a fact that I would never be able to address all of the comments in the 1.5 pages. Some of them just simply out of pure feasibility, because they would have required to get preliminary data from other models and so on. And I didn't want to wait 2 years to resubmit. I wanted to make that a swift transition. And so that really helped. I can really only say kudos to really truly talking to your program officer and figuring out what is essential here to do.
That's great. Some really good advice there. So we're going to move on to our second set of questions, which is about grant opportunities. Maybe I think Christine might have a few slides about this. So maybe we'll start off with that. But we're just going to be talking about different stages of grants and what kind of things are available, what kind of things you recommend that we apply for.
Just give me 1 second. I closed that for some reason. I closed.
I also have it. If you want me
Okay.
to.
I should be able to get it. Okay, I've got it.
Okay.
It's opening. Yeah, it's opening very so slowly. Come on. All right. Oh, sorry about that. It just won't let me share now. All right, share.
Okay.
All right, here it is. So we've already kind of mentioned some of these awards, and for people who don't, follow the NIH lingo, what are Fs, what are, Ks, what are Rs, et cetera, et cetera. This is a schematic that kind of summarizes all of the awards that NIDDK offers at this time point, right? Some other institutes may offer additional ones, but given that you're all in the PKD field, you're most likely going to come to NIDDK for funding, right? So to make this an easier kind of visual, this horizontal arrow separates the individual awards from the institutional awards. So I'll start with the bottom first. The institutional awards, as the name suggests, are awards that your institution has. An example of that, and the most common that you might be familiar with, is a T32 or T35 award, whereby the institution gets so many slots within that program, and then you can get one slot and you get paid to do the research that you do. That's great. You get paid for it, but it doesn't look good on your CV. It looks good on the CV of your mentor or the person who got that award, but you don't have any other advantage. So I would strongly encourage you, even if you are currently on a T32 or any other institutional program, to apply for an individual award. That's first of all good for your CV. It's good for the experience because you're going to need it to apply for all these other awards. Having a fellowship and then followed by a K award and then followed by an R award, you don't have to do it in that sequence at all. In fact, very few people follow that path. A career path is not a straight line. Just hearing from the four of us, we all got to kind of a similar stage of our career, but using different paths. It's like, right, it's taking left or right turns, but we all end up getting those awards. So don't concern yourself with what they call a pipeline or a career path. It's not straightforward. So if you haven't applied for an F, it doesn't mean then you can't apply for a K. In fact, from a personal experience, I never had an F or a K because I was not a US citizen at the time. I could only get an R award. So I completely skipped this career development path and got an R1, right? So that's possible as well. I wouldn't encourage you to do that necessarily if you have these other options, but I'm just telling you, it doesn't have to be a stepwise process. So the F awards are for the earlier career stages. So these are PhDs, graduate students, MD, PhDs, followed by F32, which is a postdoctoral award, right? So if you have any questions related to those, you come to me because I oversee all of the fellowships at NIDDK related to kidney disease. Tracy Rankin was mentioned in the context of K awards. So anything that starts with a K, whether that's K01, K08, K23, et cetera, you go and talk to Tracy. But even if you come to me, I'll definitely help you and kind of direct you towards it. We also have transition awards called an F99K00. As the name suggests, it's a transition between an F and a K. So it's kind of funds the end stages of your PhD and provides up to 4 years of your postdoctoral training. The trick there is none of these will be for people who are already in the kidney field. These are designed to attract people from outside of the kidney field, say engineering, biostatistics, genetics, that have not worked in the kidney space, but to do a postdoc in the kidney space. So that's that transition. We also have another flavor of a transition award, which is called the K99R00, which is a transition between a career development and also independent R01. These are extremely difficult to get. I can tell you, there's only 1 or 2 a year that NIDDK gives out in the field of kidney research. So I'm not saying that you should not try and apply for these things. I just need you to understand what the chances of you getting are not as great. And there was a question in the chat whether you'd rather go for a K or 1. Personally, I would. Doesn't mean that you can't try the K99 path. I mean, it's very prestigious to have, absolutely, but it's the chances of getting it are pretty slim. You know that as a younger investigator, as a junior investigator, within the first 10 years of your receiving your terminal degree, you have these extra called brownie points. So if you apply for an R01, if the pay line, for example, is 16 percentile, we currently fund ESIs at the 25th percentile. So you can get even a little bit, lower score, worse score, if you will, but you can still get funded as an ESI. And on top of that, our institute director always encourages us program officers to look out for these early stage investigators and try to help them even beyond the pay line. That's also a possibility down the road. Once you have that R01, I should step back one step. If you have a K award, but you're still not ready to apply for an R01, there is an R03 supplement to a K award that can go up to 2 years, or supposed to be 1 year, but it goes sometimes up to 2 years to help you get that preliminary data to write an independent R01 as well. So there's an asterisk next to only 2 of these boxes. Unfortunately, those are the only 2 awards that you can apply for if you're not a US citizen. The rest, all the training awards are designed for US citizens or permanent residents only. R01s are, those research awards, nobody asks you where you come from, so you can apply as a foreigner as well. But the training awards are mainly for US citizens and permanent residents. So that's the intro. If you have any questions about specific programs, happy to answer them.
I think there's a question from the Robbie. She asked, do you need to have an associate professor appointment to apply to K1?
Do you need to associate professor to apply for a K01?
Assistant.
Professor.
Yeah, okay. It's not an easy answer because I wouldn't say every institution, but many institutions have different names for different stages of one's career. If it's an independent career, if there's a commitment from the institution that they will provide for you and your research, then the answer is you don't need that necessarily. That title is not that important. It's more of the commitment of the institution. But again, it's not an easy answer because every institution has a different way of calling different positions.
So Robbie, to answer that, so when I applied for my K01, I did not have an assistant professor position, but I think, I know Christine, you know better than I, but from what I'm familiar with is you either have to have the position or you have to have a commitment from the institute saying that you will be appointed to that position. Now, I think it's a little trickier than that even because I was told that, and this is just what people at UAB would tell me, is that you want to make a letter of commitment to you from the institution, not dependent on you getting the award.
Oh, yeah.
So they want to see a commitment to you independent of whether or not you get the award. And I think there's sometimes a fine line in that of unspoken rules of things like, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but the position is kind of dependent on you getting the award, but they write maybe that they'll commit to the support independent of whether you get the award or not. So it's kind of like a little bit of a blurred line there, where you certainly need some sort of commitment from the university or the institute to kind of to make you competitive for that. And I know for a fact that if you don't have that, you're going to be in big trouble. So.
Yeah, on that note, just to follow up with Kurt, so I was an instructor when I applied initially, and my institutional letter for the initial submission stated that I would be promoted to assistant professor and that this is a commitment independent of the outcome of the award, which I was told was very important to state that way. Well, it wasn't funded the first time. This commitment was independent of the award outcome. So my institution was supportive enough to actually promote me as promised prior the resubmission. And so they came through with what they committed to. And sure enough, one of the reviewer in the resubmission highlighted in their institutional comment that the institution has shown strong commitment to the candidate and has followed through as stated in the initial application to make her an assistant professor, which I was in the resubmission. So I think reviewers really at that stage look at this institutional commitment very closely, and whatever agreement you can find with your institution, that is one of the key pieces of documents you're submitting together with your career development part to a K. While the research plan needs to be solid and good and whatnot, but the institutional commitment and the career development plan play a huge role for a K award.
Can I just add something to it? You're absolutely right. Both Kurt and Katharina, thank you for those comments. That those letters are not formality, even though people all think that letters of recommendations are. They're absolutely not. At any point, even the fellowships, the reviewers don't have much to look at in terms of your CV. You're still at the early stage of your career. You don't have 1 million, papers and grants that, history of getting grant funding. So they're going to look into the letters. What are others saying about you? How do you come across to other people who've interacted with you in various capacities? So they're absolutely not formalities. But another note also that helps you, not just the reviewers, it also should help you. Those letters of recommendation should help you make an assessment of what the institution thinks of you. If it's an institution that is not committed to your career, you might want to think twice whether you want to stay there or not, because it's going to be, at some stage of your career, you're going to need their support in one way or the other. And if they have no commitment, no interest in helping you, it probably is not the right fit for you.
Yeah, can I ask one question for Christine? I saw that there's no list for the R15. So you show R1. So if somebody who, after postdoc training, who couldn't go to a research intensive institute, probably just go to educational focused, can you comment on the chance for the R15 application?
Yes, the R15s don't have a standing pay line, so it all depends on how much money the institute has to commit to R15s, but they're not designed to support research careers of individuals. They're really meant to be for individuals who are committed to training the next generation of researchers, right? So the R15s are not going to be like a mini R01. They're going to be more like, these are mini projects for trainees that come to your lab. So if your career is more focused on training rather than your own research, then the R15 is a viable path for you, but it's not meant to support your research career.
Okay, let's move on. Lots of good things there. So this time we're going to talk about research interest determination. So how did you pick your career path? How did you pick what you wanted to do? And yeah, how did you decide?
Okay, I can start, I guess. So for me, when I think now retrospectively, hindsight is always more 2020. But when I was an undergrad, I loved my genetics class, and to the point where I was the person that went and finished and read the whole book, even though it wasn't covered during the semester after it was over, you know. And as I had these research experiences over summers and month-long and things, I really just loved mouse genetics and and pathophysiology as well, but I love genetic disorders. And so then when I was actually choosing a lab to do my postdoctoral fellowship in, I had the opportunity to interview in all of them. But one of the things that drew me to PKD actually was the fact that it was a genetic disorder, and it was something that I really enjoyed studying, just conceptually, basically genetics itself. But on top of that, interests are really important from a science perspective, in the beginning, just to kind of perk your interest. But to be honest, you want to pick, a focus initially, at least by looking at also the lab environment that you are choosing. You want to see that you will be able to hopefully get along well with the group that you're interacting with, that you have a mentor that can ultimately guide you, because your interests can evolve and change over time. And you may be, forging your way into fields that you never thought that you wanted to play any role in or wanted to learn about. And then that's what sparks your interest in the future. But initially, for me, it was the genetics that drew me to the PKD. And then the way that the science was kind of done, mouse crosses, that was my background. So it was a little bit of comfort, but then also room to grow as well. And that was kind of how I chose a lab.
So I guess I don't really have a good reason for how I ended up where I did. I kind of fell into it. I chose my PhD lab just based on commonalities between myself and my mentor and how well we got along. So both being from Wisconsin, that was a real kind of like bonus for me. And then when I joined Brad's lab, it was more to work on his C. elegans project, because I joined as part of an ERECTA, the K-12 fellowship that Christine had on her slide. So that program was designed to put people into kind of like a teaching and a research intensive path. And then I did that for a while. I worked on the C. elegans, and I just I really hated the C. elegans a lot. And there's another really talented graduate student in Brad's lab at the time, Jack Chang Sung, who's on this call too, who had started a project on immunology and PKD. And I started working with him a little bit, and I just kind of fell in love with the immunology stuff. So I'll actually give Jack a lot of credit for kind of getting me going down this path. And he was such a passionate, fun guy to work with that we just kind of started working on these projects like hand in hand, and it really was something that I kind of fell in love with. So I think the common thing between me and what Ronak said was we both fell in love with a certain field, and once you kind of find your field, you know it. So like when I found the macrophage and immunology field, I knew that was like the field that I love. So that's how I knew where I was supposed to be, basically.
I'm going to just offer a slightly different perspective, even though I think, Kurt, you touched upon it. For my personal experience has been that it's more important to choose the right mentor and environment than it is the field. You can always change the field, but finding good mentors is not an easy task. I think I already shared with you that after a failed postdoc, I was in a lab of somebody who was considered the royalty in kidney development at the time, but boy, was that title not deserved. So I would definitely not base it on the reputation of the field or what the achievements of that individual is, but more talk to the people who he or she trained in the past. What do they say about that person? Because you're going to need a lot of support from your mentors. And if it's not the right fit, it's going to be a very difficult uphill battle for you. And also something that is coming across to me through interacting with a lot of investigators and applicants is that there are individuals who may be great scientists, but then just not cut out to be really good mentors, and they don't let you, don't let the leash too much. They kind of let you move forward and they pull you back. Eventually, I think, Katharina, you said that you have to demonstrate some sort of degree of independence. And if you have a mentor who is not willing to let you develop it, it's going to be more difficult for you to carve that independence out. So definitely the personality, the relationship you have with the mentor is something that you should look out for.
Yeah, I think in terms of that, I'm going to presume that most of the audience here is on the postdoc to early career development stage. And under that assumption, for choosing a project, whether my own experience or not, but if you stay in the same institution or even like the same area during your postdoc or lab, when you submit the K, you really want to have a conversation with your mentor, currently your postdoc mentor, of what after that K are you allowed to take from that project that you're working on to be truly, truly independent. You have to demonstrate that transition in the career development plan of your K, but you also want to feel comfortable with the person that is your mentor, that actually will happen during the 5 years. So while your first publications, year 1 or 2 of your K, you might still be first author, eventually you want to migrate in these 5 years to be co-corresponding author as you progress through your K. And that kind of requires that if the project is similar to what your PI is doing, but just taking a new avenue of that similar area, that you have a clear understanding and agreement of what is yours and what can become yours, versus just continuing your postdoc career, but now labeling as a KO1. That is sometimes easier to be done when you actually move institutions, but that then has the caveat that if moving institution and starting a new lab, as well as a completely new project, sometimes takes you a little longer to then actually be able to submit a K because you're starting from scratch. And that's really something what I have undergone, like moving completely field from Peter's lab, starting from scratch at a new institution with like building the lab, getting mouse colonies started and whatnot. I always had to keep in mind the timeline that the NIDDK gives you for the KO1 application, which is 7 years, including the resubmission. So there you just, if you make that transition to move somewhere else, start new, just keep that in mind if you do want to have the K as still as an opportunity in terms of things. And there it depends on a little bit of when you choose the project. Obviously you want to do something what you love and what you're doing, but you have to be somewhat realistic of how quickly that given project is allowing you to get some preliminary data to do something for a K grant in terms of things. So I think it's a balance. I definitely encourage you to do something that you love doing. Otherwise, this is a very hard job to do. But there is some realism in that whole aspect as well.
Dr. Hopp, can you said when you do your introduction, you mentioned that there are 2 mistakes, when you move. So can you just tell us what the mistakes are? We're curious to know and want to avoid such mistakes. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think the mistakes that I made have nothing to do with grant applications. I think from that perspective, I consider myself very fortunate of how my path went. I think the mistakes that I made is that I moved to Colorado because of family reasons. I knew that I had to leave Mayo, but I'm not sure whether I would have necessarily ended up in Colorado, but my husband got a job here. And when I heard that they are looking for a basic PhD researcher to expand their program, I really got just excited that I get to continue doing PhD research where my expertise was, because at that point I was ready just to take whatever postdoc I could get on, similar like Ronak. I love genetics. And so I would have even moved to a different disease if that's what it would have happened. I wasn't necessarily married to PKD at the time point. So I was really excited. I was also excited that they were able to hire me as an instructor, although that really was just more a coincidence because they wanted to put me on their training grant, but I wasn't a US citizen. So I kind of argued with them that they might as well then hire me as an instructor. But throughout this process, what I failed to do is actually negotiate any sort of financial security. Like I never ask, like, how many years are you actually gonna cover my salary when I'm hired, because I'm starting a completely new project and I'm not going to get a K or any other grant anytime soon. I have to mention that my green card at that point was pending, but it's a marriage-based green card. So it was due to marrying a US citizen. So I knew eventually and hopefully I would be able to apply for a K, but I had absolutely no idea what that timeline would look like. So I never asked how many years would my salary be covered. I never specifically asked, is there a startup or what is it in terms of the amount or the magnitude of it, or in how many years it needs to be spent. So I was fairly naive. I was a postdoc who never had to do any ordering because we had an excellent tech in the lab, who never had to do anything with grant management or whatnot. So never worried really what it actually costs to do the research I am doing. And here I am getting hired as a junior faculty. So I forgot to ask all of these questions, which wasn't ideal in the back end, because as I moved on, I realized I need money and to do the research, and I would like to know and have a solid commitment of how much that is. And I would like to have some sort of job security because I was thinking of starting a family and I didn't have that either. So that was mistake first, is actually the negotiation process of what it entails to be hired at a different institution. The second thing is that I really liked the research that was going on in the division and it made me excited and whatnot, but I never really considered that I really still need a strong mentor. So I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna do this junior faculty thing now. But actually I always had a good mentor on my side and took him sort of for granted. And now all of a sudden I had nobody that was really committed to me as a mentor, which starting a completely new research avenue, I really would have needed more support than I initially had as a sounding board in terms of career development as well as project development. It took me a couple of years to find these people at the institution. I have them now and I still value them, but it wasn't initially there. And then the third mistake I really made that was pronounced is that I was given a technician and a postdoc that worked indirectly with me, like she was mentored by somebody else, but was interested to work in PKD. So she was predominantly in my lab. And I really didn't know how to balance teaching these people to start this new project while also actually establishing my new lab. So time management was really all over the place the first year that I came to Colorado, trying to get mouse colonies started, trying to establish a system for the lab, whether that is how to store sample, how to store primers, how to store plasmids and whatnot, an organization that I like because it's now my lab. I don't have to follow the organization anymore that my prior PI had, but also giving these people that are counting on me the proper attention to have them be effective and advancing their career. So that management problem is also where I can say I didn't do a good job. I hope that I'm doing a better job now. Nobody is complaining really in my lab, but I definitely wasn't doing well on that in the beginning.
Can I bring something up that it's somewhat out of context, but may not be? It's something that Katharina said, but also Kurt mentioned it, and we don't often talk about it. How does family leave impact your career and the path towards independence in developing a career? I think a lot of you, all of you have mentioned that you've had children early on. I had my children, well, one child later in my career because I didn't think it was possible to do both. But it seems that people think it is possible, and it is possible, but it does throw in a monkey wrench in a lot of ways, as you probably know. I want to mention that the NIH is starting to realize that trainees are human beings and they have private lives in addition to research. And I'm happy to say that there are programs now to help with that gap that you have in your training and your research, but for taking not just maternity, but also paternity leave these days, any family leave, if you need to take care of a newborn, or if you're adopted a child or a sick family member, you can apply for a supplement to your existing awards that would bridge you over and extend your time of training, as well as additional funds that you can do. In addition, there are very small, but nonetheless, you can apply for it, support for childcare for your existing awards. You can apply for those administrative supplements as well.
Yeah, that's a good segue into our last session, where we've got about 10 minutes to talk about our life-work balance. So if you could answer questions about having kids, having family, but also about how you keep yourself healthy and how you keep your mind healthy.
Okay. I think I didn't mention it, but I actually have two kids also. I had my first kid in my third year of residency. In retrospect, I'm not really quite sure what I was thinking at the time, to be working 80 hours a week and also have a child, but it actually worked out really well. And I was fortunate enough that when I moved to Dallas, independent of the research environment here, but I also had good family support that was able to help raise my first child, through the clinical portion of fellowship. And, you develop this dynamic of, how to balance, your experiments with daycare and work, and getting everything done. And then my second one was actually, I was pregnant while I was writing my K. And so I submitted the K and then had the second child, but it was at a big transition point. And that was actually probably the most challenging, because that's when I hired 2 new technicians. And then my mentor came to me and said, I'm getting a postdoc, but I want you to co-mentor this postdoc, because this will be a great way for you to transitioning to mentoring someone. And so that way you will be the primary driver of the project. And I'll just be there to kind of watch or provide, and serve as like an additional mentor as necessary. And so all of a sudden I had 2 brand new technicians and a postdoc and they all started essentially right after I came back from about 6 weeks of maternity leave. But that was by choice, I will say. It's all dependent on the institution, but I came back after 6 weeks, but then I worked part-time. And I think that was one of the best decisions that I made, was that I came back to work so I could keep my projects going, but in a very part-time fashion, where I would work maybe 2 days a week and I'd be home 3 days and kind of flip-flop like that. And I did that for about another 6 months almost, and so that I was able to kind of extend out all of the 3 months of leave that I could potentially take over that time. And that really allowed for me to train new people and adjust a new postdoc in the process at the same time. But it is extremely challenging, like what Katharina said, is how do you spend time mentoring the people in your lab, but also trying to start up your lab and run your projects forward. And I think for me, one of the things that's really difficult is sometimes I find myself saying, I can just do it myself because I can do it myself faster and I already know how to do this. But you have to learn to let go and to teach others to do those things as well. And I think I've gotten better at it now. But back then it was many hectic days. And I think it's important to try to figure out what you want to get done that day, first thing in the morning or early in the week, and then try to get those things done and having a focus of that and feeling good about all the things that actually did get done in the process, because we always know something goes wrong and things like that, to kind of stay positive to keep yourself going.
Yeah, I think work-life balance is all about a matter of time management. If you're good with time management, I think you can certainly do both successfully. So for me, I had our first daughter, Georgia. She was born at the end of 2019 or middle of 2019, I guess. And that was right around the time that I was doing my interviews. So for myself and my wife, that was a really difficult time because I was traveling, I was doing all these different interviews, I was gone a lot. We had a new baby at home. That was a really difficult time in our lives. And I won't sugarcoat that part is going to be very hard if that's the time that you end up having a child. Once we got our position and started my independent faculty, we had our second daughter about a year and a half. So that was like last summer to fall. And I think it's, like I said, it's just a matter of time management. If you're efficient with time management, you can make it work. You'll probably be able to work less hours. So for example, like me, when the kids are awake, I don't work if I'm home with them. I make sure I make them the priority and the focus because they're only young once. You know, you're not going to get that chance again. So if the kids are awake, I'm with them. I'm spending time with them. I won't work them. But then when they go to bed, like I'm lucky our kids both go to bed at about 7:30 to 8 o'clock. So once 8 o'clock hits, I usually will stay up and work from 8 until whatever. And if the kids are young, the kids, like sometimes when our last one was born, she wouldn't go to bed until like 10, and then I would be up writing grants from like 10 to 1 a.m. and things like that, and at night. So it's a matter of time management there, but I wasn't sleeping a whole lot then anyway because she was up crying a lot. So you kind of get used to writing when the kid's crying, and it's okay. But I think you have to be very good with your time management. And one thing I will say is we also try to make a big push in our lab for maintaining mental health and all that. So we do biannual meetings, like mental health meetings with all the people in our lab. So there's like 7 or 8 of us right now. So we make sure we every 6 months sit down, and I try as best I can to like get a feel for how they're doing on a personal level, maybe not just like a work level, to see what are some of their life stressors and things like that. And myself, I try to lead by example. So I try to 1 to 2 days a week, I'll take an hour and a half out of lab, and I'll leave and I'll go do my exercise. So I do a lot of spin bike these days. I got bad knees from too much football, but so I do a lot of spin bike, and I try to make sure I do that 3 days a week, every week. I'm trying to be consistent with that. So I'll take time out of lab to make sure I do that. We'll do our mental health meetings. We really try to make sure that we're not just working ourselves into the grave, because it's not worth that. So.
Yeah, I don't know in terms of work-life balance. I think it's important, independent of kids or not, to really appreciate that you have to have it. I can say that I don't know whether it's all the kids, but the older I got, my energy levels went down too. I blame the kids for it, but it likely could also be just simply me aging. And so I think that work-life balance and making time for yourself, like Kurt said, is really important to be able to be productive at the times that you are really dedicating to your job. If whenever it is, whether you say you take a couple hours at home for writing, or the time that you're actually in the lab or in the office, to be productive there, it's important that you have had the time to yourself as well. I try to, like Kurt, be always there for my kids when they're awake, but I also make sure that I don't work every evening, to make sure that there's time for myself. I also enjoy drinking wine, so I do that while watching something on TV, or my husband and I, we love to puzzle, jigsaw puzzle, so we sit down and puzzle. So I think that that time is as important as really the time dedicated to the kids. And if you don't have that, you will see you're not going to be as effective. Your mind is not as sharp or as quick in thinking. And so your time management only gets you so far. If you're not thinking clearly by the time that you have dedicated to work, it's really doesn't help you at all.
Well, given that I'm a little older than all of the other panelists, my experiences with work-life balance have changed and evolved over the time. Back when I was training, I didn't see many examples around me of women being successful, having children. Most of the mentors that I had around me were women who did not either have children or had children later in their life. I did not see that it was possible to have both, honestly. So I delayed having children. I was 44 years of age when I gave birth to my only child. And I think my energy levels went up, actually. It makes me feel younger that I have a child that I could be nearly a grandma to. That has changed my perspectives, later in life. If I've already decided now to have a child, I'm going to try and devote as much time as possible to that child. And I don't do some things that I personally like doing in his interests, right? So I'm making that sacrifice willingly. At the same time, I've learned the hard way that not taking any time for yourself is detrimental to one's mental health. Especially during the pandemic, it hit me really hard when my child was being, attending first grade virtually. I mean, let's face it, that's not a normal, approach to life by any means. So any of us who've had children during that time, you know how stressful and challenging that is for everybody. So maintaining some sanity is very important. So like what Katharina said, just carve out an hour of time to do whatever you are passionate about. If it's puzzling, if it's it doesn't matter what it is, just switch off. Please do. Really don't get to the point where I went. I thought I was going to have a nervous breakdown trying to juggle everything. It's very important to look after your own mental health, first of all, and as well as physical health, of course, to achieve. But I'm happy to say now that I can see that people seem to be able to have both lives, a private life and a professional life. As I said, my experiences back in the day, it wasn't like that. I was the third female faculty in Jackson, Mississippi. And that wasn't that long ago. And that reality really hits you really hard because there's nobody around you who can understand what we go through. And I hate to say this, and maybe it is controversial, but the experiences women and men may have during these critical periods of life with raising children, as well as this work-life balance, may be different for women, men and women in a relationship and in general society. It may not be for everybody, but there are differences in the experiences. So I think it's very important to talk to people around you that have gone through this so they can help you just by even listening, if not giving your advice. But having peer mentors is just as important as having, more senior mentors that are established in their careers. And so just, again, having that mental relief in some way or another is very important.
Yeah, we got one question from Randy. Great points about time management and stress reduction. It looks like Dr. Hopp has a Kanban board up behind her, is it? And is it? Okay. And have any one of you had a success prioritizing your tasks and those in your lab with visible approaches? It helps to clearly see where your task priority set personally and from the mentor perspective. Okay, thank you.
So to answer the question, yes, it is a dry erase board behind me that is subdivided in projects, grants, and papers as the headlines, and then has the different projects we're working on it. I do well by writing things out visually and seeing them, and I get great pleasure to erase things that are done. So that is why that board is there and works for me in my office. Again, people always make fun of me because they think it's because of my German nature, but even at home, a lot of things are organized in a similar fashion with a dry erase board to make sure that the kids go to all their activities, that we know exactly who is responsible for taking them, and who is like picking up the kid from school, since that has to happen and such. So I am definitely doing a lot better in organizing things visually, in terms of work-life balance, as well as the projects in the lab.
Yeah, I just use my phone. I put everything on the phone. So I don't want to have a whiteboard at work, because then when I'm at home and I'm doing stuff at home, I want to make sure I have access to the to-do list. So I simply use a note with the to-do list of everything on there. And it is really nice when you can cross something off. That's definitely very fun. So yeah, mine's phone.
And you're not German, so.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
I mean,
so we have
Wisconsin is
got,
about just the same.
we have got to sort of the end of where we were going to stop, but I just wanted to check whether you had anything else that was burning that you wanted to say before John closes. Okay, John, over to you.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. Any
I
que-
just wanted to reiterate before I forget and before we close, that if you have any questions about anything related to grant writing and things like that, please reach out to me. But even if you have questions that are unrelated to that, you just want a sounding board, as I said, mentoring is not just within your institution, somebody who's directly involved with your research. If you need any help with anything that you think I can help you with, please reach out to me.
Okay, so I think there's no further questions, so we'll call an end for this workshop. But first of all, thank you very much for our panelists, Dr. Maric-Bilkan and Dr. Hopp and Dr. Lakhia and Dr. Zimmerman, for your wonderful discussion and show your valuable experience at different background. Personally, I learned a lot. I hope that the audience also do the same way. And also, I want to thank the organizer, especially our two moderators, Yan and Rebecca, for organizing this workshop. And last but not least, I would thank you all the audience for attending this workshop and for the great question you asked. And I hope we can have more workshops that way. And this is very valuable for the young instructor or the beginner for their academic career. So, and the last, I think I have one announcement for the PhD RSC website. And so we have a online, like a form online from the PhD RSC website. And this is the formula is a discussion group, which can help you to provide help, like finding your region and find a protocol you are doing research in PhD. So I strongly encourage you to register the form and ask questions or seek for help if you need any help for the research. So I'm gonna copy the link in the chat, so then you can check it out or register for the form. Thank you. You all have a good day.
John, just one more thing, sorry. The
Mhm.
PK, because you mentioned the consortium also offers pilot and feasibility awards specifically for early stage investigators. So please check out the website. I can't remember when the next round of application is due. I think you have some time, but check it out. They offer, I think it's now up to $50,000 a year for 2 years for a project as an early stage investigator.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys.
Have a good
Thanks for
one.
having me.
Bye.
Yeah.